Okay, so in this new series that I'm thinking of recording, I'll focus on where my love for research came in, and then do an episode on specific research tools. I know I've covered some of these in the UX series, focusing more explicitly on user experience, but I think I'd want to go deeper into methodology and research design and why these can solve so much of the problems that are faced downstream in the day-to-day job of doing research, where you're just asked to have some findings. But I hope that my love for research can be infectious enough to show that these are important questions. But how did I fall in love with research? Obviously, I'm not going to talk too much about my academic background, but it started with not your traditional business degree, but I focused a lot on international relations, which had a heavy kind of desk-based research focus, and I had to write a thesis, which at the time I thought very well managed to propose a solution to the improvement of the relationship between the US, Europe, the European Union, and China, and centering on the issue of Taiwan. And that was, I believe, not seen by anybody that was actually going to implement it. So early on, you might argue, I'd noticed that doing research without impact is not necessarily a desirable thing. No matter how much I love methods, I just always get drawn to what would be the outcome of my research, and in some sense have a leaning towards action research. It seems I found that very late as a name tag for it, but I guess that can be explained by the more practical work that I did straight out of my master's degree, which followed the bachelor's. So I did marketing and strategy at work, which had a very strong focus on your strategic type of typical, almost MBA style training and case studies. So you get examples of things. So things get summarized in practical examples. You study how somebody did it really well. Company Y did something X, and then the outcome was Z. So this kind of Harvard-style teaching, I guess, affected me in also not being allergic to case study research as well, not just case study-based teaching, where these examples tend to get pulled as representative of a wider theme in the teaching, right? But also, I think even at the time I was realizing there's got to be some merit to detailed case study research, which oftentimes may be considered unfairly as not as generalizable as people would say, compared to quantitative big scale studies, which, even though they cover breadth of cases, actually don't go into the depth, right? So I'm saying this now, I'm sure that at the time I didn't have that grasp, but it's really interesting to look back at some of the seeds. And then I definitely didn't get a research job coming out of university. It was a very much a practical brand management role and marketing, but then I did lean heavily into my consumer centricity, because I did get incentivized. I was in an organization where they encouraged us to spend 2 days a month in deep hanging out with our consumers. So we'd identify people that would fit the personas that we had deduced from a combination of analytics from watching. At the time it was mainly Nielsen data for traditional media. Social media was becoming a thing, but I guess they were a bit more traditional. So it's mainly that kind of data mixed with some of our own research, and then we'd identify the people and then spend the time with them. And I just noticed the disproportionately big effect that had on how easy it was for me to argue from experience, almost, from experience research. So I spend the time with these people against senior people. The CEO used to always bring up what his kid would like and not like, and that used to annoy me because it was a technique of arguing he's got user experience on the other side. But you learn that even though you've got the research done, people can still always throw it under the bus by just having their views, and a lot of times they actually come from a place not because they want to argue, but we just have a culture of binary argumentation where they're probably considering other aspects. Really a lot of times the CEO would have been thinking about saying no to initiatives because it costs money, right? So that makes sense. And I find myself in the day job as a researcher, today. That's the case very often if you really dig deep. And I guess what I noticed as the main thing that drew me as part of the brand management job was that we had these monthly kind of deep sessions with our director that would present plans and the research, why are we doing certain things. But I noticed very early on that a lot of the times these used to be treated by others as static reviews rather than a process. And then shifting to a process orientation literally solved a lot of the problems because we were starting to piece things together. We were always in the move. And you have a process, whereas the static view puts you on edge. It's never enough. You never have enough research in a commercial setting. If you wanted to have enough research, you'd commission something academic and it would take you 5 years. And then you'd know with more certainty, but would you ever act on it? So I guess then I ended up in a side quest because of my passion that I had on the side when I was doing my master's. I thought, branding and nations were starting to be put together. People were starting to think about such a thing. Obviously, there's a long history of selling places that people that are not that deep into that field might not think about, but the idea of going to the American frontier, to dig gold, that was always kind of promoted by somebody that wanted to sometimes get you on a train and sell you a train ticket, right? This is just an example. But at the time, I applied for a few PhD opportunities, but didn't get funding around that area. And then starting a job in that area, kind of promoting a local place. Shrewsbury in Shropshire in the UK helped me get some experience into what the thing is really that was being discussed in the books. Obviously on a small scale, but I had fallen in love with living in that place anyway. Just happened to live nearby and took a big pay cut and just got the job, but I was allowed a lot of freedom to explore and do a lot of things and introduce the same kind of process orientation towards initiatives and research. and start writing and contributing to a few kind of places on this topic, went to a few conferences, and then I managed to get a PhD in this area. Now, I didn't think at the time, I guess, that I would fall in love with research methods as much, or the research aspect. I kind of always wanted to aim towards academia. That's subconsciously, probably, because it's it's always presented as a heroic place where you can create new knowledge. But I've realized, the stuff that you learn in research are very good, but I had some experience lecturing, which was very rewarding, but also so time-consuming. The people that do that, like, well played. And it's not just the lecturing, but the marking and the giving of feedback. It's a very rewarding thing to do, but to do it at the scale of what I was doing was too much for me, and that was like almost at an entry-level lecturing. The people that do that at a higher level, I don't think probably get enough of a recognition. But obviously, I'm now there's a 5th year into a 6-year part-time PhD, which has been mind-hardening, but also very good in training in practical and more academic methods. I don't know why that's a distinction, but it kind of is. The outcomes that you look for are different, and I very much see practical researchers that are frustrated in trying to do academic research in a practical setting, and then the reverse, academics that want to contribute to practice and have an impact. So maybe it's an unfair distinction, but I think of them, there is that way that not many people think about. It tends to be a usual split between qualitative, quantitative data, but to me, all is data, and you got to have the right tool for the right question, which I know is probably actually more of a practical perspective on research, because I know it seems to be that in more academic research, this is seen as too pragmatic. And I'm not saying not doing rigorous and in-depth research. I just mean, given the money and the time you've been given, a lot of times you have to think twice before committing to the most detailed and rigorous study you can ever do. Kind of the idea of what's good enough research to make a decision. So, and this perspective has really been, brought into my head through the topic of the research that I've got for my PhD, which is around decision making under uncertainty. The specific cases, and I'm interested in how people choose where to live, because oftentimes they don't probably are not aware of it, but in such a decision it's very difficult to have a calculated approach. There's a lot of things out of your control, and you can't know sometimes the outcome, the full outcome, because there are factors that play a role in that. But I've got other episodes on this where I talk a lot about the progress of the PhD, but I think I want to almost like drag out some of the methodological stuff that I've learned in this few episodes. It's been great to receive the training that goes with the PhD, and the support of having monthly reviews with 2 professors that always support, but never let you do a bad job at research. So that's definitely been helpful, because I then switched into a research role, user experience research, kind of focusing on the government digital service, kind of basically watching people use websites, I keep saying to people, but taking that facetious way of putting it to the side, it's a job that requires some detailed skills in the in the profession, but also some T-shaped, orthogonal skills that you gotta have. I mean, knowing some of the domain. So I've, had to do additional courses in user experience design and also the broader human-centered design. And the pandemic ultimately lately gave so much time to additional development that I was able to get a few certifications to help me really put a few badges towards the skill that I have been developing over the last 2 years. And I think that what I bring to the table compared to other researchers that might be working in the ecosystem of between government and private sector user experience is my deep love for research into topics like the one related to place, and geography, which makes things very much more realistic and a bit more mundane, but I find a lot of times user experience gets considered as something totally new and unique, UX. Actually, when you look at phenomenological research in multiple disciplines, but the one I'm familiar with in geography, they've got a long history, and they've got a long history of people philosophizing in this way. So having this deep rooted understanding of this part makes me feel at ease when people try to throw experience research under the bus, because it does work in a different way compared to other things. And lately I've been really drilling down as to why I think that is. And from my perspective up until now, obviously with this kind of claims I have to really hedge, because it is based on my experience, but experience is worth for something. If we have to make these arguments, that why should we be researching experience then, if we don't trust our own experience, is what I mean. And I think that experience is more generalizable than identity. I think a lot of people think of selves and people, but experience is a bit different. Experience is a mixture of body, mind, and environment. And a lot of times what we're researching in the more pragmatic aspects of user experience, when we're not drilling deep into experiences and trying to discover needs, a lot of times we're just researching what I'd call the environment. We're actually testing prototypes that people react to. It's really interesting how they interact with that. So it's in the interaction that we're interested in a lot of the times, and then comprehension of it, and then how it makes people feel. So the thinking, feeling, and doing aspects all kind of intertwined, but then at the same time we make a bit of a leap of faith and we split them out and present them to people to make decisions. So it's quite an enjoyable way of trying to stay deep in the understanding of research methods, but actually almost allowing myself to intuitively forget about that when we're having to make a bit bolder claims. Not that we exaggerate our research, but if you just try to communicate academically about what the findings are, it just doesn't seem to land. And educating people into how they should be treating different types of evidence takes time, so it takes patience, which I often might not have. Sometimes you have to stand your ground and just explain to people that they're trying to knock. The personal gripe I have is when people try to knock something that is some user has a unique way that they mess up a design, and they don't mess it up because they've done something wrong, but they discover something that we haven't thought until now because our knowledge is limited, and they show us something entirely new. Well, then, in how a lot of people's traditional mindset of this kind of finding react is, well, that's just one research. And this is a well-known problem in case study research, where Sigelkov in 2007 talks about kind of persuading with case studies and uses the example of a talking pig, which I keep using with the teams that I work with, where Fiekov says, imagine that you find one talking pig. Well, that's good enough evidence that there is such a thing as a talking pig, and up until now we didn't think that they existed. So just bringing that pig along and showing in detail how it talks, why it talks, is good enough evidence. But then again, a lot of times trying to communicate that you're not just having an anecdote, but it could be, you know, later down the line you find it might not generalize, but still at that moment in time it expands your knowledge, and expanding your knowledge when you're trying to figure out a new design is kind of all that matters at that point in time. So we don't worry about being totally right because we're building iteratively, but it's important to look at it both ways. And I guess I guess I haven't covered enough on the quantitative side, just because I kind of came initially from that aspect. My master's thesis was actually a quantitative study. I mentioned the bachelor's one being a desk-based one, but I actually did do probably one of the last mail-out surveys, because it was for quite a traditional school. Had two different schools, and they wanted to figure out, the parents of the two schools, could you actually segment them based on preferences, so that they can figure out how to best position the two compared to each other, because they were basically running the same thing. So why would you send your kid to the one school and why to the other? And I actually got a very high response rate for that, which was, you know, surprising in survey research generally, but not in that case, because I had the contacts of people that were sending their kids to these schools, and it came from the school, so people responded. So I've been quite blessed in the kind of surveys that I've been doing, that a lot of times doing it for government or kind of having an insider send them out, it does help. And also I've had some experience optimizing on A/B kind of, the digital version of a randomized control trial on a service, preparing for going into live, just to see if certain small bits that you're very certain, because of your 2 years worth of evidence, that you have a very strong hypothesis they could be done another way. So I've done that as well. So I guess I'm talking broadly about techniques here rather than just methods and approaches, and I'm probably intertwining all of them, so in later episodes it's probably going to be good to distinguish between these, because I do like to write research plans now for the teams I've got, where I force myself to think about the research context, the research objectives obviously, and then the approach, whether it's going to be qualitative or quantitative, but then also about the method, which could be all of our usual suspects in the more creative research and UX space, your tree tests, usabilities, interviews, analytics, whatever we call them, and then actually going into the details. Okay, when you want to do this, specify the technique. So for example, the most recent round that I've been doing, we're doing in-depth interviews, which is standard, but they're semi-structured around a critical case, which is a technique from a guy called Gary Klein that researches naturalistic decision making, and he developed that working, I think, with firefighters, where you have this case, and because it's so blurry into the memory of the participants, you have to keep going back to it and back to it after they elaborate, but to them they haven't dug this deep themselves. Because I was trying to do this because we're trying to find what best practice looks like, but then step by step, tell us if someone else was going to implement what you did, how should we boost their knowledge, which is kind of a behavioral science approach that I've been obviously researching for my PhD, but it's been helpful in a lot of the work where I've been researching nudges and boosts, which are not your traditional user experience research tools, but they often find themselves into the policy parts of government. And I see both sides of them being kind of paternalistic, but then at the same time, the only one that probably has some legitimacy in being paternalistic, you'd expect, is your government, because in some ways it is elected, and it's a rabbit hole of justifying it, but has to be done, that justification. And I've got a certification in behavioral science ethics, which I think now is becoming even more and more of an issue as technology progresses. What kind of a research even is okay to begin with, and I've communicated with the behavioral insights team that's working adjacent to us, to my team at the moment, where I'm contracted in, to almost peer review some of the things, so that there's no danger that we go evil, even though we're not even researching nudges as such. They're more the boost type, where boosts tend to be explicit, what some people call system 2, to talking to our reflective selves and trying to get people to understand what's really being asked of them, rather than only but purely extremely paternalistically nudging them without their awareness into more intuitive and less frictionless, frictionless pathways. But we know where these have gone and where they're going to go in the future with the way that they're used in some commercial settings. Dark patterns in user experience are a thing. I personally don't think they should be a thing, but they are, and it's one of those things where people are waking up to it, and it might get regulated, but I don't think people understand how influential the environment can be on us. And in the cases where we're in an online environment, that environment has only certain affordances. You can only go certain ways. And then as much as you have an illusion of free choice, you're actually more likely to go one way or the other. So, as usual, I do these kind of walk and talk podcasts, not very much scripted. So if I've repeated anything from before or don't follow up on what I said, I don't have the time to be double checking this, because at the end of the day I do it for fun and self-reflection, and hopefully to inspire others. So yeah, I hope this time on my walk the microphone didn't have that much feedback, but I'm so glad I figured out this way of recording through Anchor, Spotify's platform, where I don't even need to sit down anymore to record this and publish it. I'm on my phone, record it, edit, add some funky intro tunes, and then it's gone. So as usual, don't hold me to any of the usual fact checks. I don't think I tried to be controversial in what I say, but maybe I've said something that might be seen as controversial. And if it is, actually there is an option where you can actually record the response to this, which is interesting. If you're one of the 20 listeners to this and want to reply, feel free.